Under the cold lights of a Texas auction ring, a limping thoroughbred was already being priced as a loss when a quiet young girl stepped through the dust, laid one hand against his neck, and made the whole room pause just long enough for a different future to begin. The air inside the sale barn carried a mix of dust, leather, and something older, something that settled into wood over years of transactions no one talked about afterward. Boots scraped against the concrete in uneven rhythms, and the auctioneer's voice moved like a practiced current, steady and unbroken, pulling each horse through its turn. Outside, the Texas sky stretched wide and pale, but in here, the world narrowed to a circle of rails and a few measured seconds. A bay gelding passed through first, solid, broad-backed, the kind ranchers understood without needing to ask questions. A few hands lifted, numbers moved. The gate opened again. Another horse followed, younger, nervous, still useful. Then the thoroughbred came in. He stepped forward with the shape of something that once belonged to speed. Long lines, a neck that still carried a hint of lift. But when he turned, the rhythm broke. Just slightly. Just enough. His hind leg did not land with the same certainty as the others. It was a small flaw to an untrained eye. It was everything to the men watching. One of them leaned forward, not out of interest, but out of confirmation. Another shook his head before the auctioneer even finished calling the opening number. A third didn't bother looking twice. They had seen enough horses to recognize the cost hidden inside a limp. The horse slowed near the center of the ring, ears flicking once, then settling. He did not fight the rope. He did not call out. He simply stood, waiting in the quiet way animals learn when noise has never helped them. The bidding stalled before it began. A number was offered, low enough to test the room. No answer. The auctioneer repeated it, faster this time, as if speed might manufacture interest. Still nothing. The rhythm faltered for the first time that morning. Somewhere near the back, a man cleared his throat and shifted his weight, already thinking about the next lot. Another checked his watch. The moment stretched. Not dramatic, not tragic, just thin. Empty. The thoroughbred lowered his head a fraction. Not in defeat. Not quite. More like an adjustment. The kind a horse makes when standing too long on uneven ground. His body shifted, redistributing weight away from the leg that wouldn't fully trust the floor beneath it. The handler gave the rope a small tug, encouraging movement. The horse obeyed, stepping forward again, careful, precise. He had learned how to move through discomfort without drawing attention to it. But attention, once lost, rarely returns. The auctioneer exhaled, cut the number, and waved the horse off with a practiced flick of his hand. The gate opened. The thoroughbred passed through as quietly as he had entered, replaced almost immediately by the next animal, whose presence filled the space more easily. The room moved on. Outside the ring, the sounds shifted. Less echo, more wind. The holding pens stretched along the fence line, patched wood and metal, each section carrying its own tension. Some horses paced, some called out. Others stood with their backs to the world, conserving whatever energy they had left. The thoroughbred found a place near the far corner, away from the others. He stood angled slightly, favoring his hind leg again, head low but not withdrawn. His ears moved now and then, catching pieces of the world, voices, footsteps, the creak of gates. But he did not react to them. He waited, not for rescue, not for recognition. Just waited. Beyond the fence, people passed without slowing. A few glanced in his direction, their eyes pausing just long enough to confirm what they already believed. There were easier horses here. Safer ones. Profitable ones. This one carried too many questions. A gust of wind moved through the yard, lifting dust into the light. It brushed along the horse's coat, stirring the faint outline of muscle beneath skin, that had once been kept in peak condition. For a moment, in that shifting light, he looked almost like what he had been before. Then the dust settled. Footsteps approached along the fence line, lighter than the others, unhurried, not drawn by urgency, but by something quieter. The thoroughbred's ear turned, just slightly, toward the sound. He did not lift his head, but he listened. The footsteps slowed before they reached the fence. They didn't carry the weight of decision the others had. No quick stride, no impatient shift of gravel under heel. Just a pause, as if whoever stood there had chosen to stop, not because they had to, but because something held them in place. Lily rested her arms lightly along the top rail, saying nothing at first. From where she stood, the yard felt different. The noise of the auction blurred into something distant, like wind moving across open land. What remained close was smaller, the sound of a horse shifting its weight, the faint scrape of hoof against packed dirt, the slow rhythm of breath. She watched him the way she had learned to watch since she was little, not looking for what was wrong, but for what was still trying to hold together. The thoroughbred did not turn toward her fully. He remained angled away, conserving himself, one hind leg resting just enough to ease the pressure. But the ear nearest her moved again, sharper this time, fixing on her presence. Lily noticed that. "He's not gone," she said quietly. Her father stood a few steps behind, arms crossed, his gaze moving between the horse and the rest of the yard, as if trying to keep his focus practical. "He's sore," Ben replied. "That's what you're seeing." Lily didn't argue. She shifted her weight, letting one hand rest against the weathered wood of the fence. "No," she said after a moment. "He's holding it in." Ben exhaled through his nose, a sound halfway between patience and warning. He had heard that tone before, from people who meant well, from people who didn't understand how quickly a horse could become more than they could handle. "We didn't come for this," he said. "I know." But she didn't move. The wind slipped through the yard again, carrying the smell of hay and dust and something faintly metallic from the trailers. It brushed along the horse's coat, and this time his head lifted, just slightly, not enough to meet her eyes, just enough to shift the line of his neck. Lily waited. She had learned that rushing a horse like this was the fastest way to lose him. Not lose him physically, lose the part of him that decided whether to trust or not. That part moved slower than muscle, slower than instinct. She stepped along the fence, closer to where he stood, but not directly toward his face. Her path curved, soft, giving him space to see her without feeling cornered. Ben watched her now, more closely than before. "Lily," he said, quieter this time. "Don't push him." "I'm not." She stopped within reach of the rails, her hand still resting on the wood. The thoroughbred shifted again, adjusting his stance. For a second, it looked like he might step away. He didn't. The space between them held. Lily lowered her gaze slightly, not in submission, but in calm. Horses read eyes faster than words. A direct stare could feel like pressure. She softened it, letting him decide what this moment would be. Seconds passed. Then the horse moved first. Not a full step. Just a lean, barely noticeable unless you were watching for it. His head angled a fraction closer, enough to shorten the distance between them. Ben straightened where he stood. Lily didn't react. She let the moment settle. Let it become real before she changed anything. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand from the fence and reached forward, not to his face, not to the sensitive line of his muzzle, but to the place just above the halter, where the neck met the shoulder. Her fingers hovered there for a breath, then touched. The contact was light. No pressure, just presence. Under her hand, the muscle tightened first, a reflex, quick and controlled. She felt it like a held breath. Then, just as quietly, it released. The thoroughbred exhaled, long and low, the sound barely audible over the wind. His head dropped a fraction, not in surrender, but in something closer to acceptance. The tremor beneath his skin softened, not disappearing, but no longer fighting itself. Lily kept her hand there, steady. "He's trying," she said. Ben didn't answer right away. He had seen horses settle before. He had seen them tolerate touch, even lean into it when they needed relief. But this was different in a way he couldn't name immediately. There was no demand in it, no transaction. The horse wasn't asking for anything. He was allowing something. Ben stepped closer to the fence, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. The thoroughbred's ear flicked toward the sound, but he didn't pull away from Lily's hand. That was what made Ben stop. In a yard full of noise, movement, and pressure, the horse had chosen stillness, and held it. Ben rested his hands on the top rail, looking down at the animal in a way he hadn't in the ring, not as a calculation, not as a problem to solve, as a question. "You don't even know what he's been through," he said, more to himself than to her. Lily's fingers moved slightly, a slow stroke along the neck, feeling the warmth there, the life still steady beneath the surface. "He doesn't either," she replied softly. "Not anymore." The wind eased. Somewhere behind them, another gate slammed. Another horse was led forward, another number called. The world of the auction kept moving, indifferent as ever. But here, in this narrow strip of space between fence and breath, something had shifted. Not loudly, not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough to make walking away feel different than it had a few minutes before. Ben looked at the horse again, really looked this time, at the careful way he stood, at the line of his back, at the quiet in his eyes that wasn't emptiness but restraint. Then he glanced at his daughter's hand, still resting there, steady and certain. He exhaled slowly. "That kind of horse," he said. "He's going to cost more than he's worth." Lily didn't pull her hand away. "Or maybe," she said, "we just don't know what he's worth yet." Ben didn't respond, but he didn't tell her to step back either. And for the first time since the thoroughbred left the ring, the idea of leaving him behind no longer felt simple. The trailer door shut with a hollow, final sound that carried farther than Ben expected. It wasn't loud, not compared to the noise of the auction yard, but it lingered differently, like a line drawn between what had been decided and what now had to be lived with. Inside, the thoroughbred stood quietly. His weight shifted again to protect the same hind leg. He had loaded without resistance, not eager, not fearful. Just compliant in the way horses become when they have learned that refusal rarely changes the outcome. Ben secured the latch, his hand pausing on the metal for a second longer than necessary. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. Lily stood nearby, watching through the narrow slats of the trailer wall. She didn't answer. Not because she disagreed, but because she knew the kind of answer he needed wouldn't come from her. The engine turned over, and the truck pulled out onto the narrow road, leaving the auction yard behind. Dust lifted in the rearview mirror, then settled back into the place where decisions were made quickly and forgotten just as fast. The drive home stretched quiet. Texas land rolled out on both sides, wide, open, indifferent to the small story moving along its edge. Fence lines cut across the horizon. Dry grass bent under the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a group of horses moved together, their motion smooth and effortless, untouched by the kind of calculation that had defined the morning. Lily watched them until they disappeared. "He used to run like that," she said, almost to herself. Ben kept his eyes on the road. "Maybe," he replied. "Or maybe he just looked like he could." That was the difference between them. Lily saw what might have been. Ben saw what could still go wrong. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had begun to drop, casting long shadows across the yard. The barn stood quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from routine rather than absence. A place built on repetition, not decisions made in a single day. Ben backed the trailer into place, set the brake, and stepped out slowly. For a moment, neither of them moved toward the door. Then Lily walked forward. She didn't rush. She unlatched the gate and stepped aside, giving the horse room before asking anything of him. The thoroughbred shifted inside, adjusting his stance as the light changed around him. The world beyond the trailer was different. Quieter, wider, less confined. He hesitated, not out of fear, out of caution. Lily waited. The seconds stretched, but she didn't fill them. Horses knew how to read silence better than anything humans said. Finally, the gelding stepped down, one careful movement at a time. His hind leg touched the ground last, testing it before committing his weight. He stood still once he was out, taking in the space. The barn, the fences, the smell of hay carried on the evening air. None of it familiar, but none of it pressing against him either. Ben watched closely. "Let's not pretend this is something it's not," he said, his voice steady but lower now. "He's not sound. He's not going to be." "I know. And whatever's wrong back there." Ben nodded toward the hind leg. "It didn't happen yesterday." "I know," Ben exhaled, running a hand over the back of his neck. "Then you know this isn't just feed and water, it's vet calls, it's time, it's—" He stopped himself before finishing the list. "It's responsibility," Lily said. The word settled heavier than the rest. Ben didn't argue. Instead, he walked toward the barn, motioning for her to lead the horse inside. Lily took the rope gently, not pulling, just guiding. The thoroughbred followed, his steps slow but deliberate, each one placed with care. Inside, the barn light flickered on, casting a warm glow against the wood. Dust floated through the air, catching in the beams like suspended time. The stall had been prepared quickly, fresh bedding, water, space enough for the horse to rest without feeling trapped. Lily led him in and unclipped the rope. For a moment, nothing happened. The thoroughbred stood in the center of the stall, his head low, ears shifting as he listened. The newness of the place pressed in around him, not overwhelming, but present. He turned slightly, testing the space, then shifted his weight again, easing pressure off the same leg. Ben leaned against the doorframe. "We need Ruiz to take a look at him," he said, "before we do anything else." Lily nodded. "Tomorrow," he added. That night came quietly. No dramatic change, no sudden transformation. The horse drank, ate a little, then stood again, conserving himself. Outside, the wind moved through the fields, carrying the low sounds of distant cattle and the occasional creak of fence posts settling in the dark. Lily returned once more before going inside. She didn't bring anything with her this time. No rope, no brush, no intention to ask. She stood at the stall door, resting her hands on the wood, watching him. The thoroughbred lifted his head slightly. Their eyes met. Not as a moment of connection meant to mean more than it did, but as recognition. Two beings aware of each other in the same space, nothing forced between them. "You don't have to prove anything," she said quietly. The horse didn't move, but he didn't turn away either. Behind her, the house light clicked on, and Ben's silhouette crossed the window briefly before disappearing again. Inside, decisions were still being processed, measured against cost, against time, against the kind of life they could realistically offer. Out here, in the dim light of the barn, those questions hadn't reached the horse yet. He only knew where he stood. And for the first time since the auction, that place was not temporary. Lily stepped back from the stall, letting the quiet settle again. Tomorrow would bring answers. But answers, she was beginning to understand, were only the beginning of something much longer. Morning arrived without ceremony. The kind of light that spread slowly across the ranch, touching the fence lines first, then the barn roof, then the ground where the dust still held the coolness of night. No urgency, no signal that anything important had begun, just another day, indistinguishable from the one before. Unless you knew what to look for. Lily was already outside when the first gate creaked open. She carried a bucket in one hand, the metal handle tapping lightly against the rim with each step. The sound was familiar, steady, the kind that belonged to routine. Inside the barn, the thoroughbred lifted his head as she approached, not sharply, not with alarm, just enough to mark her presence. He had not moved much during the night. The bedding beneath him was barely disturbed, the water level only slightly lower, a horse conserving energy, not yet trusting the space enough to rest deeply. Lily set the bucket down quietly. "Morning," she said, her voice soft but clear, like she had said it 100 times before to other horses who needed nothing more than consistency. He watched her, not closely, not with expectation, just aware. She stepped into the stall without reaching for him. No halter, no rope, just movement that asked nothing. She checked the water, refilled it, then stood still for a moment, letting the space settle around them. The thoroughbred shifted his weight again. The same careful adjustment, the same guarded balance. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't draw attention. But Lily noticed it every time. Behind her, boots crossed the barn aisle. Dr. Ruiz arrived with a quiet nod, her presence as steady as the morning itself. No rush, no urgency, just purpose. "Let's take a look," she said. Ben stood nearby, arms crossed again. Though the tension in them had changed, it was no longer resistance. It was calculation, measured, watchful, trying to stay grounded in what could be known. The exam began slowly. Hands moved along the horse's body, not searching for miracles, just for truth. The hind leg came last. Dr. Ruiz pressed, traced, observed the response. The thoroughbred held still through it, though the tension returned under his skin, a quiet tightening that spoke of memory more than pain alone. "Old injury," she said after a moment. "Not recent." Ben nodded once. "Can it be fixed?" Dr. Ruiz didn't answer immediately. "It can be managed," she said instead. "That's the word we use when we're being honest." She stepped back, giving the horse space again. "He's compensating through his back. Hooves are out of balance. It's not one thing. It's everything building over time." Lily listened without looking away from the horse. "Will he always hurt?" she asked. "Not if we're careful," Ruiz replied. "But he won't be what he used to be. That part's already behind him." The word settled into the barn like dust. Not harsh, not unexpected. Just final in a way that left no room for imagination to rewrite them. Ben exhaled slowly. "So, what are we talking about?" "Time," Ruiz said. "Consistency, farrier work, controlled movement, and knowing where the line is, what you ask of him and what you don't." She glanced toward Lily. "He can have a good life. That part is still there." Lily nodded, as if that was the only answer she needed. The rest of the day unfolded in pieces. No breakthroughs, no sudden change, just the beginning of a pattern. The farrier came by in the afternoon, his truck rolling up in a cloud of dust. He worked quietly, adjusting the angle of the hooves, correcting what time and neglect had shifted out of place. The rasp moved in steady strokes, each one small, each one necessary. The thoroughbred stood through it, not relaxed, but willing. By evening, the routine had already begun to take shape. Water, feed, check the leg, walk a few careful steps, stop before it became too much, repeat. Lily stayed close through all of it, not hovering, not pushing, just present. At one point, she sat outside the stall with a book in her lap, reading out loud in a low, even voice. The words themselves didn't matter. The rhythm did, the steadiness of it, the lack of demand. Inside, the horse shifted, then stilled again. The tension in his body eased. Not gone, but quieter, like something that had learned it didn't need to stay ready all the time. Ben watched from the doorway. He had expected this to feel different. Bigger, maybe, more certain. Instead, it felt slow, unremarkable, in a way that made it harder to measure. "Doesn't look like much," he said. Ruiz, standing beside him, didn't take her eyes off the stall. "It never does," she replied. "Not at the start?" Ben nodded, though he wasn't sure he fully understood yet. Inside, Lily turned a page. The sound was soft, almost lost in the quiet of the barn. But the horse noticed. His ear flicked toward it, then settled again. Minutes passed. Then, without prompting, without pressure, the thoroughbred took a step forward. Just one. Not toward the door. Not away from it. Just forward, placing his weight more evenly than before, testing the ground in a way he hadn't the day before. Lily didn't react. She kept reading. Because sometimes, the moment that matters most is the one you don't interrupt. Outside, the light began to fade again, stretching shadows across the yard. The same wind moved through the fields, the same sounds carried across the distance. Nothing had changed, and yet something had. Not in a way anyone could point to, not in a way that would convince a room full of buyers, but in the quiet, repetitive language of days, where trust is built without announcement. The direction had shifted. The thoroughbred was no longer standing still because he had nowhere to go. He was beginning, slowly, to choose where to place his next step. The road to the county fairgrounds curved through low fields already turning gold under the early summer sun. Dust rose behind the trailer in soft plumes, then fell away again, leaving only the steady hum of tires and the occasional shift of weight from inside. Vale stood balanced as best he could, no longer bracing against every movement, but not careless either. His body had learned the rhythm of travel again, careful, measured, aware. Lily sat beside her father, her hands resting quietly in her lap. She didn't speak much on the drive. She didn't need to. The past weeks had taught her that some things settled better in silence. Ben kept his eyes on the road. "You don't have to do this," he said after a while. "I know." "He's fine at home?" "I know." Ben glanced at her briefly, then back at the horizon. "This isn't about showing him off." "I'm not," she said. He didn't respond, but something in his posture eased. Not agreement, not fully, just less resistance than before. When they arrived, the fairgrounds were already filling. It wasn't a large event. A handful of trailers, families moving between shaded areas, a few pens set up near the edge of the arena. A rescue booth stood off to one side, pamphlets laid out under a canvas tent, their corners lifting slightly in the breeze. Nothing about the place demanded attention, which made it easier to see what was real. The trailer door opened. Light spilled inside, warmer than the barn, carrying the scent of dry grass and sun-warmed earth. Vale shifted once, then stepped forward, lowering himself down with the same careful control he had practiced at home. His hind leg touched last. He paused there, taking in the space. Voices moved around him. Children laughed somewhere beyond the fence line. Another horse called out, sharp and brief, then fell silent again. Lily stood at his shoulder, not pulling, just holding the rope in a loose line. The distance between them was small, but it wasn't fixed. He could have stepped away. He didn't. They walked together toward the edge of the arena. A few people turned as they passed, not because of anything dramatic, but because of the way the horse moved. Careful, thoughtful. Not the loose, careless stride of an uninjured animal, but not the guarded stiffness of the day he left the auction either. Somewhere along the rail, a man leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes. Recognition came slowly. Ben noticed it before Lily did. "That's him," the man said to no one in particular. "From the sale." No one answered. But a few more people looked closer now. Inside the arena, the ground had been set with a few simple poles. Nothing raised, nothing meant to challenge, just markers. A quiet way to show how a horse thought through movement, Lily led Vale in. The space opened around them, the low murmur of the crowd settling into something softer. She didn't change her pace, didn't adjust her grip. Everything remained as it had been at the ranch, consistent. They approached the first pole. Vale lowered his head slightly, his attention shifting downward. The line of his neck lengthened, his step shortening just enough to measure the distance. He paused, not out of hesitation, but calculation. Then he stepped over. Clean, careful, no stumble. The second pole came, then the third. Each one the same, not effortless, not automatic, but deliberate in a way that mattered more. Lily didn't look at the crowd. She watched him. Because this wasn't about proving something to them. It never had been. At the far side of the arena, she turned him in a slow arc, giving him time to rebalance. His hind leg followed through, not perfectly, but without the sharp hesitation it once carried. Ben stood at the rail, his arms no longer crossed. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. But he wasn't calculating either. For the first time, he was just watching. Near him, the man from the auction shifted his weight again. "Didn't think he'd make it this far," he said quietly. Ben didn't answer. There was nothing to argue. The man wasn't wrong, not based on what anyone had seen that day. But that day hadn't shown everything. When Lily led Vale out of the arena, there was no applause, no moment that demanded recognition. Just a few quiet nods, a few longer looks, and the subtle shift of understanding that moves through people when something doesn't fit the conclusion they had already made. Back at the trailer, Lily loosened the rope and rested her hand against Vale's neck. The same place, the same quiet contact. But this time there was no tremor beneath her palm, no held tension waiting to decide whether to stay or leave. Just warmth, steady, unguarded. Ben approached slowly, stopping a few steps away. "He's not the same horse," he said. Lily nodded. "No." Ben looked at Vale for a long moment. "And he's not what he was before, either." "No." The wind moved across the fairgrounds, lifting dust into the light again, just like it had at the auction. But here it didn't settle the same way. It didn't carry the same weight. Ben exhaled. "Guess that's not the point," he said. Lily smiled faintly, her hand still resting where it had first touched him weeks ago. "No," she said, "it's not." That evening, back at the ranch, the sky stretched wide and open, painted in long streaks of fading gold. The pasture gate stood open, leading out to a larger field than Vale had known before. He stepped through it slowly. Not because he had to, because he chose to. The grass brushed against his legs as he moved forward, each step placed with the same quiet awareness that had carried him this far. Behind him, the barn stood in soft shadow. Ahead, the field opened into space that asked nothing of him. Lily waited by the fence. She didn't call him. She didn't need to. After a while, Vale turned. Not sharply, not as a reaction. Just a decision made without pressure. He walked back toward her, the distance closing one careful step at a time until he stood within reach again. She lifted her hand, resting it gently against his neck. No hesitation, no question, just presence. Out here, there were no numbers, no quick judgments, no seconds that decided everything. Only time. And the quiet understanding that what had changed was never just the horse. It was the way he had been seen. And once that changed, everything else had room to follow. Sometimes a horse doesn't need to be restored to what it once was. It needs someone willing to see what still remains. Vale's story reminds us that worth isn't measured in performance, but in care, patience, and responsibility. If this story stayed with you, there are more journeys ahead. each one waiting to be seen with the same quiet understanding.
If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts below and follow Horse Heart Healing for more stories like this.